Black women have paradoxically created and destroyed the concept of respectability politics as a result of the stigmatization of the black woman. This started between 1890 and 1920 with the National Colored Women's Congress and the Women's Convention of the National Baptist Convention, who instructed its members to be living contradictions to crude stereotypes of black women, which permeated much of the early 20th century media landscape. Those stereotypes included promiscuity, loudness, lack of education, drug abuse, and much more. So, black women who considered themselves activists at the time then began dressing in modest clothing that erased the black female figure, began speaking very eloquently and softly, just in an attempt to rewrite their reputation and mitigate the stereotypes created by white people. Modern-day black women are much more likely to reject the concept of respectability politics because it was deeply entrenched in assimilist thought which reinforced many of the black stereotypes that it sought to annihilate, as well as suppressing the voices of unwed black mothers, queer black people, and many other black subgroups in need of representation during the civil rights movement. Respectability politics has always been to appease the white gaze. In 2019, a study was conducted to determine an individual's societal influence when expressing emotions such as anger, and it was dependent on race and gender. It states, if anger expression from these groups, women and African Americans, is interpreted as an internal emotional reaction detrimental to rationality, anger should decrease their credibility and influence. In contrast, people might be less likely to perceive anger expression from white men as indicative of an internal propensity for emotional reactions, because white male anger is perceived as externally caused. For example, conviction about the topic being discussed. It might be less likely to detract from credibility. This is problematic for a number of reasons, but it is so indicative of stereotypes that have been ingrained and reinforced for hundreds of years. Respectability in itself is thought to be earned or acquired by status, but when it comes to respectability politics, the context in which it has been used has always been about manipulating minorities into believing they need to go the extra mile in order to simply be competent. This reinforces the idea that black people or other minorities are inherently behind or less than, therefore need to perform their respectability in order to get the same job as the far less formal, maybe even far less qualified, white person. Respectability politics is used today to encourage civil obedience among black communities, which has become especially noticeable during the recent rise in police brutality protests after the murder of George Floyd, and the pushback against them. Activism today has become much more bold and inclusive than it was during the time of the Women's Convention. Black activists are emphasizing that all Black lives matter, even the women, queer, and trans ones. Although this strive for inclusivity was done with good intent, Black women are still chastised from taking these steps and inadvertently told to be more respectable to the general cause rather than expanding on the generality of the cause. Brittany Farrell, a 2014 Ferguson Black Lives Matter activist, said, "You can be labeled as divisive when calling out sexism, but it's our duty to do that. It's our duty to do that because all that's going to happen if we don't is people are going to recreate structures that are going to continue to marginalize people."